Alan Clarke is almost 80 now. Time has changed his face. His boots have long been put away. But one version of Alan Clarke never grew old. He is still flying through the Wembley air, still meeting Mick Jones's cross, still heading Leeds United into history. For millions, that single moment became Alan Clarke. But it also hid a darker truth. Football did not only make him a legend, it slowly took pieces of him away. England had one of its deadliest finishers, yet never gave him the legacy his goals deserved. The old game punished his body. Paris left one of the deepest scars of his career. Then came the return to Leeds. A return that nearly damaged everything he had built. Many fans remember the famous header. Few know what came after it, or why those who played beside him believed he was one of England's most natural goal scorers. Today, as Alan Clarke stands on the edge of turning 80, his story is no longer just about glory. It is about what football gave him, and what football almost took away. Subscribe, because football almost took Alan Clarke's legacy with it. Before Wembley, Alan Clarke had already earned his reputation. He scored goals at Walsall, then Fulham, then Leicester City. Most clubs saw a reliable striker. Don Revie saw something much more dangerous. In the summer of 1969, Leeds United paid a British record £165,000 to sign Clarke. It was a huge gamble. Not because Clarke lacked quality, but because Leeds already had stars everywhere. Billy Bremner, Johnny Giles, Jack Charlton, Norman Hunter, Peter Lorimer. Yet Revie believed one piece was still missing. A ruthless finisher, a striker who stayed calm when everyone else panicked. That was Alan Clarke. He was never the loudest player. He simply knew where the ball would arrive. And when it did, he rarely missed. The nickname Sniffer soon made perfect sense. He could smell a goal before defenders even sensed the danger. Revie had not bought another famous name. He had bought the final piece of his great Leeds side. Within months, nobody doubted why he had paid a record fee. Every great striker had a different weapon. Some relied on speed, others relied on power. Alan Clarke relied on instinct. He saw chances before anyone else. While defenders chased the ball, Clarke chased the space. One loose touch, one poor clearance, one moment of hesitation. That was all he needed. He was never the loudest player, never the most spectacular, but inside the penalty area, he became ruthless. Johnny Giles later described Clarke as one of the most modest men in football. His personality stayed calm. His finishing never did. Don Revie trusted him. His teammates believed in him. Opponents learned the hard way that giving Alan Clarke even one clear chance was often the biggest mistake they could make. He did not score because he created magic. He scored because he understood football, a split second before everyone else. That was the gift. That made Alan Clarke one of England's most natural goal scorers. By 1972, Alan Clarke had already become one of Leeds United's most trusted players. But one afternoon changed his legacy forever. The FA Cup final, Leeds United against Arsenal. Wembley Stadium was packed. The match was tense. Neither side wanted to make the first mistake. Then, the moment arrived. Mick Jones burst down the right. He lifted a perfect cross into the penalty area. Clarke had already started his run. Before Arsenal's defenders could react, he threw himself at the ball. A diving header. Straight into the net. Leeds led 1-0. That goal proved enough. Leeds lifted the FA Cup, and Alan Clarke became the man forever linked with one of the club's greatest victories. For many supporters, it remains the most famous goal of his career. But Clarke never wanted to be remembered for just one afternoon, because long before Wembley, and long after it, he kept doing exactly what he had always done. Scoring the goals that won football matches. For Leeds United, Alan Clarke was one of the first names on the team sheet. For England, things were very different. His international career began perfectly. At the 1970 World Cup, he scored on his England debut against Czechoslovakia. Most strikers could only dream of a start like that, and the goals kept coming. By the end of his England career, Clarke had scored 10 goals in just 19 appearances. It was an outstanding return, yet somehow, he never became the face of England's attack. Managers came and went. Selections changed. Opportunities disappeared. While other forwards enjoyed long runs in the side, Clarke was often left waiting. Many believed England never truly made the most of one of the country's finest natural finishers. Looking back today, his international record tells a very different story. It tells the story of a striker who scored whenever he was trusted, but was never trusted often enough. For a player of Allan Clarke's quality, that remains one of the biggest what-ifs of his career. If Wembley was Allan Clarke's greatest triumph, Paris became one of his deepest scars. In 1975, Leeds United reached the European Cup final. Only Bayern Munich stood between them, and the biggest prize in club football. But what happened that night still divides football. Early in the match, Clarke burst into the penalty area. Franz Beckenbauer came across. Clarke went down. Leeds wanted a penalty. The referee waved play on. Moments later, Peter Lorimer found the net. Leeds celebrated. Then the goal was ruled out. The celebrations instantly turned into disbelief. As the match slipped away, so did the European Cup. Bayern won 2-0. For Leeds players, supporters, and Allan Clarke himself, the pain did not end with the final whistle. Many believed they had been denied the biggest prize of their lives. Even decades later, that night in Paris is still spoken about with anger. Not because Leeds lost, but because so many believed they were never given a fair chance to win. For Allan Clarke, it became another reminder that football can sometimes take away what it once promised. For years, Allan Clarke had punished defenders. Now, football slowly began punishing him. The endless tackles, heavy pitches, relentless seasons. The game was starting to leave its mark. His knees no longer responded the way they once had. The sharp movement that had made him so dangerous became harder to produce. Even so, Clarke refused to complain. That generation rarely did. They played through pain, because that was simply football. By 1978, his time at Leeds was over. He moved to Barnsley, hoping there was still one more chapter left. Instead, the ending came quickly. After a crushing 7-0 defeat at Reading, Clarke decided his playing career was over, but he left with one final lesson. He took his Barnsley players down a coal mine, not to punish them, but to remind them how fortunate they were to earn a living through football. It perfectly summed up Allan Clarke. Even at the end, he never believed football owed him anything. He believed you earned every moment, and accepted the price that came with it. Retirement did not end Allan Clarke's connection with Leeds United. It brought him back, this time as manager. For many supporters, it felt like the perfect reunion. One of the club's greatest heroes was coming home. But the Leeds he inherited was no longer Don Revie's Leeds. The winning mentality had faded. The great players were gone, and the club was already beginning to fall apart. Clarke faced impossible expectations. He tried to rebuild. He backed expensive signings, most famously, Peter Barnes. The Guardian later wrote, "Sniffer proved he had no nose for a bargain." It was a cruel line, because as a player, Clarke had smelled goals before anyone else. But as manager, that transfer made people question his judgment. Almost everything went wrong. Results collapsed. Confidence disappeared. Criticism grew louder every week. Leeds were relegated. For the first time in 16 years, they were out of the first division. Only weeks later, Clarke was dismissed. It was one of the cruelest chapters of his career. The man who had helped build Leeds' greatest memories could not stop their decline. Football had given him unforgettable glory. Now, it handed him one of the hardest failures of his life. Today, Allan Clarke stands on the edge of turning 80. The stadiums are quieter. The cheers belong to another generation. But his name still lives at Elland Road. Most people remember the Wembley header, the famous finish, the medals. Very few remember what came after. When football finally ended, life did not. Like many players of his generation, Clarke did not step into a life of endless luxury. He stepped back into ordinary life, away from the cameras, away from the packed stadiums. For a period, he worked as a traveling salesman. The man who had once played before thousands was now living a life few supporters ever imagined. He never chased headlines. He never begged for attention. He simply carried on. The same way he had played. Quietly, with dignity. Years later, Clarke admitted that modern football had changed beyond recognition. He believed money had transformed the game. But one thing never changed. His pride in Don Revie's Leeds United. His love for the teammates, who built one of football's greatest sides. Sporting heroes later described Allan Clarke as one of the truly outstanding natural goal scorers of his generation. Perhaps that is why his story feels so bittersweet. England never fully rewarded his brilliance. His body carried the scars of a brutal era. His return to Leeds ended in heartbreak. And one of the game's most natural finishers slowly disappeared from football's biggest conversations. There is an old football truth. The game gives you unforgettable moments, but it never promises a perfect ending. For Allan Clarke, nothing could be more true. Almost 80 years after his journey began, he remains far more than one famous goal. He remains a Leeds United legend, a natural goal scorer, a football man, and a reminder that greatness is often measured by the price paid long after the final whistle. Subscribe, because the greatest football stories rarely have happy endings.